We had a subject about guilt, which is something that has a tendency to come up quite a lot as we start to observe more and more our real intentions, to be more honest with ourselves, to question ourselves about things we always told ourselves, about why we do things, about how we behave, about why we are attached to things so much. And as we do this, if we are working correctly, it's normal that we will have to face some pretty ugly truths about ourselves. We will have to see at some point that the thing that really drives us in our lives is really selfishness. This is the main overall theme of the thing. We have to realize that we don't really care for anybody as much as we care for our own selves. And many times we can believe we are doing something based on a good intention, doing something for a good reason, but finally it turns out to be not so much the case. Like, for example, just to take an easy example, we might give money to charity, but are we really doing it purely out of the goodness of our heart for the sake of practicing generosity, for the sake of practicing giving? Or do we want to kind of use it to remove our guilt of being rich while the other one is poor? Do we want to show off how generous we are? Do we want to have our name written on a wall somewhere? There are all these other kind of subtle little motivations that are actually really the true drivers behind a lot of what we do. Like, if we don't get anything for ourselves, if we really don't get anything for ourselves out of an action that we do, we won't do it. There always has to be something that's in our interest. And we're not used to seeing things like this, although this really is how the mind is conditioned to work. We have to see these things in ourselves in order to go out of them, but seeing them isn't easy, and it can bring guilt. It can bring a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. So that was all mainly by way of introduction to the question of what do we do when we see something that is so disgusting and so horrible to see in ourselves? And the answer, of course, is pretty simple. Work to correct it, work to remove it, and that's it. But it's not quite as simple as that, because we can have the tendency pretty easily to fall into shame, regret, and just beating ourselves over this kilesa, this defilement that we never realized we had. And this hatred that we then feel towards ourselves, or how we might beat ourselves, being like the kind of like the house elf Dobby who is beating his head against the wall and saying, "Bad Dobby, very bad Dobby, how dare you?" This is pretty obviously counterproductive and doesn't get us anywhere. In fact, it's simply adding more fuel to the same problem. Because again, we are attached to our image of ourselves. Again, we are disturbed. Again, we identify with whatever kilesa is in our mind. And we're not working to remove the problem. So how you remove it is simply to not add more fuel to it, to just stop. It's like a fire. As long as you add wood to it, it will continue to burn. As soon as you stop adding wood to it, it will stop. And if we respond to the fact of seeing an unpleasant truth about our mind with anger, hatred towards ourselves, beating ourselves in guilt, this is adding fuel to the fire. It's not removing. Another example for this is a Sufi story about a man who is on his way to speak with God, and on his way he meets 4 people, each of whom has their own problem, their own question that they want him to ask of this God. So don't get confused, we're not advocating the praying to God or going to see God to talk to God to make him solve your problems or anything like that, but the point of the story still stands. So the first man that this prophet meets is an old man who is a monk, a practitioner who is living alone, sitting by the side of the road. And when he meets him, the practitioner says, "Hey, I have a question for you. I want to know, why has it been so long that I have never been able to see God?" But the prophet looks at him and he notices, as the man is talking, that he has a very long beard, and as he's speaking, he is lovingly stroking his beard. So he says to him, "Hey, I don't even need to ask God. I can see your problem right away. It's because you're too much in love with your beard. See how you're stroking it there? Because you're too much in love with your beard. You're looking at your beard. How can you have the eyes to see God? So he continues on his way and goes to see God, talks to God, comes back. And on his way back, he meets the same man again. And now the man is pulling and tearing out his beard. This bloody thing that stopped him from seeing God for so long. Now he's full of hatred for it. And now he again asks the man, "Still I don't see God. What's going on?" And so the man says, "Well, of course you can't see God. You were busy stroking it and now you're busy tearing it out, your beard. Just forget about your beard." So it's the same thing. Let's say when we are attached to the attention of others or the appreciation of others, for example, without knowing, without realizing, and at some point we see this inside ourselves and we really see the nature of it, how unpleasant and selfish it is, finally, this attachment and acting by this attachment. Before we were acting by this attachment, but now if we cry, beat ourselves, are angry with ourselves because of this, it's exactly like being the man with the beard. First stroking this beard, being attached to it, now hating it, beating ourselves, still being preoccupied with the subject, which means that of course our mind is not clear and of course we can't see anything really clearly. As the man could not see God, we cannot see Dhamma. And another example, more of a counter example this time to show what is the correct way to behave in regard to this problem, is the story of a particular nun who I already talked about in the video about not trusting the mind. It's a woman who became a nun in the time of Buddha out of faith and then entirely lost sight of the aim, went for respect, went for good food, stopped practicing correctly, and for years was acting in this irresponsible or heedless way. And then at some point she just came to her senses and realized what a miserable, selfish, lowly path she had been following. And at that moment, what is the great wisdom in her is that she did not fall into guilt. She did not fall into beating herself over how she had behaved or thinking that she was just a bad meditator, a bad practitioner. She did not identify herself with the kilesa that had been driving her. Instead, she said, "Oh, these were enemies. I'm not following them anymore. What has been driving me, I will not follow it anymore. I stop now. I change." And she just changed, completely switched direction. And within one night, she became Arahan. So this shows two main things. First, that when you realize that you have been doing wrong, in whatever way, what is needed is to correct it, to change it. We often kind of have the feeling that we have to feel guilty if we've done bad, as if just the fact of feeling guilty somehow makes it less bad or makes us less bad. But feeling guilty does not correct the problem. If we realize something that we've done is wrong and we feel ashamed, good. But then drop it there and just correct. That's it. What's needed is to correct. And maybe we'll fall back in the same bad habit again. Okay, no problem. Correct again. Stop again. Pick yourself up again. It's never okay and a good idea to fall into feeling guilty. It does no good. The other thing that the example of the Arahan woman shows is just how fast this can be. Often we think it's going to be obliged to be a long process that's going to take years and years and maybe lives and lives, but it doesn't have to be. The mind is not made of rock. It's soft. It's soft like water if we allow it to be, if we don't stick to our old habits, our old ideas, our old image of ourselves. It can change so fast and so easily. The truth is that we are really free in each moment to decide what quality we want to have inside of us. Absolutely free. We are not bound by whatever we did in the past or whatever way we wrongly behaved or well behaved in the past. we are free. In each moment, we have the possibility of correcting, changing. And what the guilt does is that it fixes us, it ties us, it says, you did that before and you deserve to be punished now. But that's not true. We are free in each moment. We are not the same person as we were even 5 minutes ago. And again, just to be doubly or triply clear, it doesn't mean that we don't have guilt in Buddhism. Therefore, I can break whatever rules I want, I can be as immoral as I want, and I don't feel guilty because guilt is bad. Of course not. Removing guilt is when we want to correct ourselves entirely and purify ourselves entirely, not only at the level of actions and words, but at the level of thought. Nothing except a pure, clear mind is acceptable. But of course, going and actually correcting the thing that is wrong is part and parcel of the work, of the job. But if we are too busy feeling guilty, just like the man too busy pulling out his beard, we will not be able to have a clear mind to be able to properly correct what is wrong inside of us.